Well, a very good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Gurry. I'm the Director of Policy and Research here at VCOSS. I'd like to begin today, of course, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm speaking from today, namely, in my case, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I want to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, to emerging leaders, and, of course, to any Aboriginal people on the call. Just a sort of quick note about accessibility. If you require closed captions today, please make sure to turn on your Zoom settings. I'm just looking down the list of participants. We've got a pretty significant showing today, I think, and it's just great to see so many people in our virtual room. We had upwards of 200 registrations today, which really does speak to the importance of our subject, namely the deep dive we're doing in relation to that critical relationship between First Nations communities and renting. A reminder about these events that they are very much for you, frontline community service and sector workers. The intent really in these sessions is to aid wider and deeper understanding of Victoria's rental rules that are set out in the Residential Tenancies Act 1997. And of course, we're here today to talk about renting in Victoria through the lens of First Nations experiences, and specifically from First Nations leaders in this space. I want to acknowledge that their leadership and persistence have driven significant progress in this space in recent years. Of course, we have the critical advancement of treaty, a nation first, and the establishment of Gillang Wall. We have the development and release of Uruk for Transformation, which included 2 chapters specifically dedicated to the question of housing and First Nations people. And yes, the implementation of the Victorian Aboriginal Housing and Homelessness Strategy. Notwithstanding these reforms, First Nations peoples face systemic discrimination in almost every stage of the rental process. And we're going to do a deep dive into the drivers of that sort of systemic marginalisation today and challenge ourselves with respect to what can be done. Firstly, we're going to look at that critical role of accessing safe housing and the role it plays in advancing Aboriginal self-determination and housing security more broadly. Secondly, we're going to examine key provisions of the Residential Tenancies Act and those provisions which are of importance to practitioners when supporting First Nations renters. And thirdly, we're going to look at sort of key referral pathways and tools which can support practitioners working with First Nations renters. Really, we want to make sure that you have all the information you need to advance the rights and interests of First Nations peoples. We've got 2 rather than 3 very special guests today. Unfortunately, Jira what is a very late cancellation due to unavoidable circumstances. They apologise for that, and it's rather unfortunate, but we nonetheless had a very packed agenda anyway, and 2 really amazing speakers to hone in on. The first of which, of course, is Auntie Jill Gallagher, CEO of VACCHO and Deputy Chair of VCOSS, no less. Auntie Jill's going to talk us through housing as a key social determinant of health and the key challenges and barriers facing First Nations communities in the rental market. We're also going to have a presentation from Siobhan Doyle. Siobhan is Principal Managing Lawyer for Civil Law and Human Rights Practice at the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service. So Siobhan will be doing a legal deep dive into the key rights renters can exercise under the RTA. So without further ado, let's get into it. I welcome Auntie Jill.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone. I wish I could see you, but I can't. But it is a beautiful morning out there, a little bit nippy, but and since Jonathan has done a beautiful acknowledgement, I'm not going to do an acknowledgement. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay honour to the beautiful country that we all live on. I'd like to pay honour to the wisdom of the ancient ones and the old ones that came before us, all of us. I want to honour the oldest living culture on the planet. One of the very earliest farmers in the world that we all have in our own backyard. And not only that, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were the earliest humans on the planet to actually manufacture stone tools. In other words, use a stone and make a difference. So I want to honour the wisdom that came before us, but also the wisdom in the room. And I thank VCOSS for allowing me to speak today. When we talk about health, for many of us, the first thing we think of or comes to our minds is we think of hospitals. We think of doctors, medicines and treatments. Yet some of the most significant influences on our health exist far beyond the walls of the healthcare system. The conditions in which people are born, live and work all have profound impacts on health outcomes. These are known as the social determinants of health. And among them, housing stands as one of the most fundamental issues that impact on our health. Housing is much more than just the roof over your heads or our heads. It is the foundation upon which people build safety, security, connection, and opportunity. In traditional times, every Aboriginal person had a home. A stable home supports physical health, emotional well-being, and sound education. On the other hand, poor housing conditions, housing insecurity, and homelessness can contribute to poorer health outcomes right across the lifespan and for all communities. For Aboriginal people in Victoria, housing inequity remains not just a significant challenge for us, but a legacy of historical injustice. Understanding the relationship between housing and health requires us to acknowledge the profound impacts that colonisation had on my people. Dispossession and systemic disadvantage that continues to shape the experiences of Aboriginal communities today, whether you live in remote, rural or urban. Safe, secure and affordable housing is essential to health. We know that people living in stable housing are more likely to access healthcare, maintain employment, support children's education, and most importantly, establish social connections. Housing not only provides a place for rest, but it also contributes to a sense of identity, dignity, and belonging. Overcrowded living conditions can contribute to stress and family conflicts, as well as increase the transmission of infectious diseases such as the flu, COVID. Housing that is unaffordable can force families to choose between paying rent and meeting other essential needs, such as buying foods and medication or accessing medications. The evidence consistently shows us that housing insecurity is associated with higher rates of chronic disease, higher rates of mental health, anxiety, and psychological distress. Our burais, in other words, our children who experience unstable housing, are more likely to encounter developmental challenges and poorer education outcomes. So when we look at it from this perspective, housing influences not just current health, but also future health and well-being. Our home is deeply connected to culture, to kinship, and to community. The ability to maintain relationships with family and retain connection to country contributes to our social, emotional well-being. That connection to country, I just want to expand on a little bit. And as I see a lot of the towers that have been decommissioned and pulled down, because a lot of those towers really aren't good for your health. And when you see people accessing country and being able to see the world and feel the world and hear the world is really important when designing infrastructure for all families, not just Aboriginal. Housing policies and systems that fail to recognise these cultural dimensions risk creating inequity and exclusion. One of the most persistent challenges for us is affordability. Across Victoria, rental prices have increased substantially in recent years, while vacancy rates have remained low. For households already experiencing economic disadvantage, securing affordable housing has become increasingly difficult. As a result, many families face significant housing stress, often spending an unsustainable proportion of their income on rents. VATCHA has participated in the Aboriginal Homelessness and Housing Forum since its inception. And while the forum has achieved many things, we know more still needs to be done. The forum provides a dedicated space to engage in culturally safe planning, advocacy and action to progress the strategic objections of the self-determined framework for Aboriginal housing and homelessness reform in Victoria. And it's called Every Aboriginal Person Has a Home. The framework was developed by community for community in 2020 to reflect the objectives and priorities of the Victorian Aboriginal community and to respond to community needs across the housing homelessness systems over the next 20 years. Over the last 5 years, there has been a 30% increase in the number of Aboriginal Victorians accessing specialist homelessness services. 30% increase. Sadly, the gap in housing between Aboriginal Victorians and non-Indigenous Victorians, it does continue to widen at a very rapid rate. Discrimination within the rental market presents another major barrier, and believe me, it is there. That discrimination is real. Research and community reports continue to indicate that First Nations applicants may experience direct or indirect racism during the rental application process. While anti-discrimination legislation does exist, the lived experience of many Aboriginal people and families suggest that discriminatory practices remain a stark reality. And I have personally experienced that when I worked in family violence, trying to get women out of the Aboriginal Women's Refuge into private rentals. As soon as we said we're the Aboriginal Women's Refuge, sorry, we've got no vacancies. Oh, no, that one went yesterday. And yet when we rang up the day after, it's still available. So that does happen. It is real. Those who have previously experienced housing instability, family violence, or financial hardship may struggle to provide the information expected. These requirements can unintentionally exclude people who are already facing disadvantage. Overcrowding is another important issue affecting some First Nations households, and I witness that every day down in Collingwood. Cultural obligations and kinship networks may involve accommodated extended family members during times of need, but this can lead to overcrowding. Overcrowding conditions can contribute to stress, reduced privacy, and increased risk of infectious transmission, such as flus, COVID, and the list goes on. And a lot of our burais and our children are at high risk. Locations also influence housing experience for Aboriginal people. For those living in regional and rural areas of Victoria, rental options may be extremely limited. In some communities, there are simply not enough suitable properties available. Now, just relocate to a larger regional centre, I hear a lot of people say. But relocating to a larger town or cities can disrupt access to cultural networks, can disrupt your connection to your own country, and support systems and connections to country, all of which are protective factors for social and emotional well-being. The ongoing effects of colonisation cannot be overlooked in the discussion about First Nations housing. Historical policies of forced removal, displacement, exclusion from land ownership have enduring consequences. These experiences have contributed to the intergenerational trauma and socio-economic disadvantage that continues to influence housing outcomes for our communities. Acknowledging this history is essential if we are to understand why disparities exist and why equitable solutions require more than individual level interventions. Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, and ACOs in short, they play a very critical role in delivering culturally safe housing services and supporting tenants to navigate the complex systems. ACOs understand the strengths, needs, aspirations, and the communities they actually serve. Investment in community-led solution is therefore an important component of addressing inequality, housing inequality. If we are serious about closing the gap in health outcomes between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians, we must address the conditions that shape these outcomes. And access to safe, stable and culturally appropriate housing is one of those conditions. VATCHO and its members have recently created a pattern book that features culturally responsive housing typologies. Now, I had to look up what typologies was, by the way, just to let you know. But I was involved in developing those typologies, and amazing work. And that means we can build homes that facilitate Aboriginal ways of knowing Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing, and how we live. We all have a role to play in creating a Victorian rental market that is fair and is free of racism and inclusive and responsive to the needs of Aboriginal peoples. This means listening to Aboriginal voices, supporting self-determination and recognition, housing as a fundamental contributor to the health and well-being. So I'd like to thank you very much for listening to me, and really keen to hear any comments, questions. So I'll hand you back to Jonathan. I think I'm doing that.
You are, Auntie Jill, and thank you so much. I'm sure I speak for everyone on this call when I say we could actually listen to you all day on this subject, because you've really underscored why housing and access for everyone, not least First Nations peoples, constitutes one of the most important social justice challenges of today. I wrote down furiously a number of things you were saying, because they're just so good, and I want to use that in VCOSS advocacy going forward. You know, that notion that housing is a foundation on which people build safety, security and opportunity. You spoke so powerfully and poignantly about the profound impacts of colonisation, and I do want to call out, for those of you who haven't, I'm sure most of you have had the opportunity to read Auntie Jill's testimony before the Yoorrook Justice Commission, but it draws quite profoundly on those links between the past and the present. And a lot of the testimony informed Yoorrook for Transformation, which of course, as I mentioned at the outset, goes deeply into housing. I suppose just before I introduce Siobhan, what you captured most sort of powerfully, I thought, Auntie Jill, was the fact that housing is a fundamental human right, and that right can never be realised when systemic discrimination still pervades the system. So thank you for today. And I will now hand over to Siobhan for the next presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. There it is. Okay, hopefully you can all see that now. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'd like to echo the acknowledgement of country from Jonathan and Jill's amazing words before. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, to Auntie Jill and to any First Nations people on the call today. I also want to acknowledge that today I'm speaking from the experiences of my clients. I'm not a First Nations person myself. I have worked at VCOSS for about 7 years. And so when I'm speaking about experiences, I'm speaking on using my clients' experiences. So I'm the principal lawyer of the Civil and Human Rights team. I'm here today, to do a deep dive, not as deep maybe for like specific parts of the legislation. I will reference some, but I wanted to talk broadly about a few things. So first off, evictions. It's the number one area that VAL's, our civil team, practice in. It's the number one thing we do. I've just had a lawyer message me this morning about a possession order she had at VCAT today for successive breaches, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we're doing these multiple times a week, all the time, and it's our most important thing because, as Auntie Jill said, safe housing is the most important thing. It's the thing that if I had a magic wand, I would fix, because I think it's the number one thing for clients. It will be the number one thing to help close the gap, and I'm hoping I can give you some tools today, how to use the law in favour of your clients, some tools to do some self-help, and some referral pathways as well. So first off is evictions. I hope most of you should know this, but if you don't, so from about November last year, there is no more no-fault evictions. So any notice to vacate issued after a certain date in November last year, I can't remember the exact one, you can't just say, you're out. There has to be a reason, and there's lots of different valid reasons. I think the slides will be available for everyone later, so I've done a link here to the long list of reasons on one of the government websites. But some of the common reasons we see for notices to vacate are rental arrears is number one. Danger happens occasionally, so has to be quite serious danger. Houses being sold is another very common one. Successive breaches, so that's successive breaches of various obligations under the Act by tenants, and illegal use, we see that occasionally as well. Now, when a landlord gives a notice to vacate, they'll say it's for rental arrears. They'll say, you've got to be more than 14 days in arrears, and then they'll give the notice to vacate, and they'll say, unless you make up that arrears, we want you out. Now, the most important thing here is to remember tenants don't need to leave when a notice to vacate is given. They should get advice immediately, and I'll talk more about that later. But it's a kind of a warning that that's the first step in taking action at VCAT for a possession order, so for an eviction. Now, for rental arrears, it will say you're X amount in arrears. If you pay up, you don't have to leave. If the renter doesn't make good on the arrears, then the landlord could apply for possession, and that's an application at VCAT, the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. Then an application is made, a hearing will be listed for possession order matters. It doesn't go to the RDRB, which I'll talk about later. And then the tribunal has to decide whether or not it's reasonable and proportionate to make a possession order. So this is one bit of legislation I have put in. So under Section 133 of the Residential Tenancies Act, they can only make a possession order if they decide it's reasonable and proportionate. They have to think about the interests of the residential rental provider, so the landlord. I use landlord because residential rental provider is a bit of a mouthful. The renter, any co-tenants, so that could be other people on the lease, also other residents, so that's children, other family members, people who are impacted by the possible eviction, and then any neighbours or any people who might be affected by the behaviour of the renter. So that won't come into play for rental arrears, but that might come into play if there has been successive breaches or a danger notice. So the rent has been alleged to have committed some sort of dangerous act. So that's what they've got to look at. And our lawyers, this is our strongest weapon in fighting for tenants to remain in their houses. So we will use this section, and the section wasn't always in there. It's been in there for the last 5 or 6 years, since before COVID. But this section gives us the ability to fight for renters, and it's very important. So to determine whether something is reasonable and proportionate, there is a list of criteria under Section 330, subsection big capital A of the Act. Again, there's a long list. It's whether or not the breach is trivial, lots of different things, the duration of the conduct. So again, if you're really interested, you can have a look at the Act online, but the courts have interpreted it, and VCAT has interpreted it as this, which I think is really helpful. So the decision as to whether the reasonable and proportionate test is satisfied has been framed by reference to whether on the balance that the impact of making the order on the renter is harsher or more severe than the impact on the residential rental provider of not making the order, or whether the hardship to the renter outweighs the hardship to the residential rental provider. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially it's a balancing act of who is going to be more worstly affected in this matter. So for rental arrears, it's sometimes an easy argument for us to make if the arrears aren't too much. If the renter has the ability to pay rent plus a bit extra to knock down the arrears, the impact on the landlord, we would say, is quite minor. And therefore, the impact of making the renter homeless in the housing market is much harsher. And we have great success in getting payment plans. And this is especially in relation to social housing providers, government, the Department of Housing, and any affordable rental stuff. Now, if the arrears are huge, it can be difficult. And if the arrears are very big, and I'm talking, $3,000, $4,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, and it's a private landlord, and there is not an ability for the renter to pay that back within 6 to 12 months, it can be very difficult to argue that the that it's not so harsh on the landlord. Now, the landlord has to present evidence as well, so you've got to take all that into account. But it can be difficult. Like I said, we have great success. Now, this also is used for any of the other notices to vacate. So danger, we would argue that homelessness is obviously the number one thing that we are saying is going to happen to the renter, and so we're trying to balance that up against the interests of the landlord and any other neighbours and residents. So sometimes there's evidence presented about that. And like I said, it's a number one thing that we can use to help renters stay in their homes. We sometimes present evidence, like medical evidence is really helpful. So letters from social workers, housing workers, health workers, to a letter to say the impact of homelessness on the renter is X, or the impact on the children. I've gotten letters from principals before. It doesn't always have to be like a psychological report. It can be lots of different things. I encourage our lawyers to think outside the box. Any evidence that we can present to VCAT will help a renter stay in their home. So it's very important. We try and pull out all the stops. Another really important thing to keep somebody in safe housing is that the housing is maintained in good repair. So that's an obligation under the landlord, under the Residential Tenancies Act. They have the obligation to maintain a property. They can't just let it fall into disrepair. And that obligation is on governments, it's on social housing providers, it's on everyone. So it's very important that tenants know that, right? And you can let your clients know if they're speaking to you saying, my shower's broken, my heater doesn't work, I've got cracked windows, all those things, they have the right to get repaired, and repaired in a reasonable time. So it doesn't matter if the renter came into the property and it was in disrepair. It doesn't matter if they're paying rent, and it doesn't matter about the age or character of the property. One thing I will flag now here is a lot of renters stop paying rent because they are frustrated and at their wits' end because no repairs have been done. Now, our advice, and our very strong advice, is to continue to pay rent, because if you stop paying rent, then they can kick you out for not paying rent. And then it's really difficult to get back. You also get too far behind. It's really hard to catch up. But if you're in repairs, you need to decide first off, is it urgent or not? So urgent repairs are defined in the Act. So that's things like flooding, gas leaks, dangerous electrical faults, breakdown of cooling or heating in certain summer or winter, and those sort of things. If it's urgent, let your landlord know immediately and in writing. Very important. So don't just do it over the phone to your real estate agent, to housing, to anyone. Put it in writing, because then we have a paper trail for later on. If they don't do anything, you can organise to have the repairs paid for yourself. Now, that's not possible for a lot of the renters that we assist. And you can go to VCAT. Now, VCAT have a special new resolution system called the RDRV, so Residential Dispute Resolution Victoria. It sits within VCAT. If I could see people on the screen, I'd ask how many of you had heard about it. Hopefully most of you have heard about it. They did a lot of media. It's been up and running since about July last year. It sits in VCAT, and it's there to help disputes between landlords and renters in order to stop it needing to go to VCAT. So my understanding is that if a renter makes an urgent repairs application, it'll get urgently looked at by RDRV, and if necessary, it has to be heard at VCAT within 2 business days if that can't be resolved. Now, I think the resolution coordinators, they try and call the landlord up and let them know that you need to fix this ASAP. If they don't, the matter could be listed for a hearing, and then VCAT could make repair orders, for example, to repair the shower, to investigate mould, to use a suitably qualified tradesperson to look at a flood, all those sort of things. So that's urgent repairs, and RDRV can help, and I think that they can do some really good jobs. You could help your clients apply themselves to RDRV. It's online, nearly all of it now. I believe that you could still call up and put an application in if using a computer is not easy for you. But the new system is doing all right. They're doing their best. They're getting a huge amount of applications, and I would encourage anyone, don't wait around. If your landlord's not fixing something that is urgent, make the application. That's my advice to our lawyers. That's what I do if I'm assisting a client or having no luck. I just make the application because I find that really hurries along the landlord to fix the thing that they should have fixed. For non-urgent repairs, again, please tell your clients to notify their landlord in writing. If it's still not fixed, again, same sort of system for urgent repairs. It's just a bit less urgent. You make the application to RDRV. There might be some back and forth there. If the parties can't agree about what repairs need to be undertaken and in what time frame, you could push them to get a VCAT hearing and get orders, and then the renter could be eligible for compensation later on. So compensation is one way we can get some money back for renters when they've been inconvenienced by the lack of repairs to a property. Now, we'll make applications against lots of different landlords. Sometimes we do that via VCAT. Sometimes it might be via a letter of demand. We've had some great successes in getting compensation for clients, that have had leaking roof for months or mold problems. So again, it's not easy, but it's certainly something that renters can do, and it's something that I encourage you to refer people to us and to other legal services to get advice about the renter's rights about compensation. Now, some interesting tools that I wanted to highlight. So I'll talk about VALs and all the good things we can do, but there's other self-help tools that are fantastic. So there's the Dear Landlord tool at Justice Connect. It's a self-help tool. I just tried it out this morning, and I think it's not online right now, but it has been online in the past. So it kind of steps you through like how to write a letter to your landlord, what advice you might need to give, and it's like a multiple choice, not like a bot, I imagine. It seems really useful to me. I ran through it a few times. I think I'm a big believer in clients getting legal advice if they need it from a lawyer over the phone or in person, but some people might not want that. We might be at capacity. That does happen occasionally, or your client might be in a regional area. They're happy to use the computer, or you might want to step it through with them and use this tool. I think that can be a really great way to assist your clients. Another useful tool is Tenants Victoria. I encourage everyone to have a look at Tenants Victoria's website in general. It's written not for lawyers, it's written for renters and people wanting general information about the tenancy law. I sometimes look at it first, and then I'll go to my other website of Justice Connect's Homeless Law for a more in-depth legal analysis. But the Tenants Victoria website, it's very detailed. I think you might have had Ben Cording on giving you a talk about renting rights one time. I remember the VCOSS people told me that. So Ben is an incredible resource for information about the RTA. And I'm sure he has a lot to do with the website as well. So you can use the repair toolkit on their website to draft up a letter, notice of repair. It sets it all out. It'll put the right sections of the Act in for you. And again, you could help your clients use that. You could refer them to that. So then they can have a really professional letter to give to their landlord to say, please fix my shower or whatever else is broken in the house. And I think it shows that it'll show the landlord the renter knows their rights, which is incredibly important. Now, some referrals to VALs. So we have quite a big civil team, and like I said, our number one area is tenancy. We are a statewide service, so I'm based in Preston, and most of our rent lawyers are based in Preston. However, we do have offices across Victoria, and I know that you help people across Victoria. So, for example, we have an office in Bendigo, Warrnambool, Shepparton, Morwell, and Mildura, and Werribee. And so they have, most of them have civil lawyers in them, and if not, we can sometimes give advice over Teams with somebody else in the office. We do a lot of our work over the phone, and I encourage you all, if you've got a First Nations renter that you're assisting that you think might need some legal advice, and I would say if they're having problems with their landlord, they're at VCAT, they need legal advice. And I would really encourage you to make referrals to our team. So got our civil paralegal email there, the phone number, and we do experience an incredible high amount of calls. We aren't able to answer the phone all the time. And I really encourage, if you're leaving a message on behalf of your client, please leave a message, their name. We put it in a big, long list we have, and we do our best to call people back as soon as we can. If it's urgent, let us know that, and then we do our very best to prioritise that. So, for example, if there's a VCAT hearing the next day, which is not uncommon, people do call us up. We do our very best to at least give that person a call and give them some advice. I can't promise we can represent them with such short notice, but we do our very best to call them, talk through their options. At least then they can go into the VCAT hearing with some support. Some other really useful legal services, like I said, Tenants Victoria, check out their website. They give advice over the phone as well. Homeless law, so if a client is at risk of homelessness, which a lot of renters will be if their possession order is going to be made, you can make referrals to their homeless law team. Fantastic lawyers. Local community legal centres. So across the state, there is an amazing community legal centres that nearly all of them would do some sort of tenancy law. And if that's just providing some advice or representation, you can find your local community legal centre by following the link I put up there. And Victoria Legal Aid, again, another great resource. They've got duty lawyers. Sometimes if we are in a bind and we can't appear for a client last minute, they have a duty lawyer that can jump on the VCAT hearing. And the VCAT hearings normally are on telephone now or video. Occasionally they're in person, but that it depends on what VCAT you're at. Some other important programs that I hope people are aware of, but I think they kind of come and go a little bit, and they do change providers. So this is the best information I could find late last week on the Aboriginal Tenants at Risk program, so ATAR. We've been receiving a fair few referrals from the ATAR worker at the Aboriginal Advancements League. Wadawurrung is down near Geelong, Badak, and Ways. So they are some other providers of the ATAR. So my understanding is that ATAR workers will help, clients where their tenancy is at risk. So they might do some letters, make referrals, find out what is going on with the renter. It's non-legal support and it's going to be really, really helpful. Another really great program is the Aboriginal Private Rental Assistance Program, so APRAP. You might have heard of PRAP. That's the Private Rental Assistance Program. This is specific to Aboriginal private renters. They can sometimes help pay arrears down, which can be incredibly helpful, so to pay a large chunk of the arrears. Now, their funding is up and down. I understand it changes all the time. I don't know if VASCO or GJAC have funding right now. They're the two providers that I could find. It's not all the way across Victoria, so I think there are some places that you could just refer your clients, your First Nation clients, to the regular PRAP provider, but these are two APRAP providers that you can refer to. And I probably need more information. I couldn't find up-to-date information on the program, but we do use these two providers when we're asking for some brokerage to help pay down the rental arrears. Check it on time. I think that'll about wrap it up. I've got plenty of time for questions, but I just wanted to say thank you for having me today. These are my details. I'm very happy for anybody to reach out to me directly if they have any questions, and I really appreciate you having me here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. That was really, really interesting and super helpful, I think, to all our practitioners out there. Before we go into the Q&A section, which will commence in about 30 seconds, I just wanted to mention a couple of things from what you had to say, Siobhan. The reasonable and proportionate test and that sort of balance of impact, that really resonated for me, and it does strike me as one of the most sort of potentially powerful levers we have at our disposal. And I guess it ties into what Auntie Jill had to say in terms of the fundamental importance of housing and the social determinants. It sort of linked nicely into it linked both what Auntie Jill had to say with what you had to say, which I thought was really useful. And then the practical tools that you spoke to, and a shout out to the community legal centres in particular. So a shout out from me as well to our VCOSS members and others on the call. I might start with you, Siobhan, on that front, and just in terms of the reasonable and proportionate test. You mentioned that it's one of the most powerful levers. How is the sort of the jurisprudence bearing out on that front in terms of which way VCAT members are going in terms of their evaluation of where the balance of impact lies?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jonathan. Like I said in my presentation, if it's a social public housing, even if the arrears are like 10 grand, if the client can pay off 10 grand for 20 years, we will get a payment plan generally. And so they decide that that balance of the client being homeless is, way outweighs any inconvenience or financial disadvantage to the landlord. Where we find difficulties, for example, if there's a danger notice, I've had, a matter where a client really did the wrong thing and VCAT placed a lot of weight on the impact to the neighbours and what happened in that event to them. So that was a really big, that was a hard one, but that sometimes, you don't always win there. So again, also the financial disadvantage to the landlords, if they can present evidence that their mortgage is, they're about to get their home repossessed, something like that. If they're trying to get their daughter or child to move in and their daughter and child has nowhere else to live, again, that weighs it up. So I think there's some good jurisprudence. It's definitely helpful. We use cases all the time. But VCAT is dependent on who you get as a member, and you've got to be prepared to have some evidence so at least they can hang their hat on something. So if you can get evidence from a principal at school to say how disruptive it would be for the kids to move schools, like it's obvious that making people homeless is not good, but sometimes you need something to the VCAT member to hang their hat on there. So, and medical evidence is great as well.
That's really, really useful. And yeah, we'll all be watching the evolution of that test with great interest. Auntie Jill, if we can bring you back into the call as well, because the next question goes to you, and it goes right to the sort of the heart of your speech at the start when you talked about overcrowding and the impact of overcrowding on health outcomes. The question is, what do you see as the important supports or reforms to protect First Nations renters' access to suitable and safe housing, which is not overcrowded? Can you speak to any sort of reforms or supports that you think are worthy of underlining right now?
Okay. No, I don't. I don't know of any reforms that have been put in place to alleviate the overcrowding, but I do know that it actually happens in a big way. And I'll give you an example of one that I was aware of and still am aware of. A single man living in one of the walk-ups in Collingwood, and he's got a 2-bedroom and he's Aboriginal, and all the homeless mob go there. They either sleep on his veranda or sleep on his couch or sleep in his backyard because they feel safer than sleeping out in the streets. So, and years ago, housing contacted me and basically says, can you please, I have to be honest with you, the man that we're talking about was my brother. And he opened up his home to everyone that didn't have a bed, basically. And some of them were very safe. And in the end, it actually put him in hospital just recently, where he was violently attacked. But the housing people knew of that, and they wanted me to do something about it as his sister, whereas they should have. And I said, the only way you're going to fix this is all those people who are homeless, dropping in and staying on his couch or whatever, give them a flat. Find a home for them. So it is there, and it's not just in Melbourne, it's right across Victoria. People coming out of prison, Aboriginal people coming out of prison is a humongous issue to house them, and a lot of our mob that were in prison are in there for, basic crimes of poverty. Yes, we still got some, some ones that you wouldn't want sleeping on your couch. But at the end of the day, there are no, to my knowledge, programs or documents that try to address that overcrowding.
Thanks, Auntie Jill. And I think the fact that there are none or that none come front and centre says something pretty powerful in and of itself, doesn't it? I want to now go back to Siobhan for a second and just tie some threads between the two speakers on the subject of discrimination. Siobhan, if a landlord is discriminating against a First Nations renter, what are the pathways? What are the options?
Yeah, there's a few options, Jonathan. So under the Equal Opportunity Act, you could file a discrimination claim against the landlord. I echo what Auntie Jill said before about, racism and discrimination occurs in the housing market all the time. The really annoying thing for me as a lawyer is that it's so difficult to prove. Now, say, for example, an Aboriginal person is applying for a rental property, sometimes in Metro, but regional Victoria. Their land, they know, because they know about the real estate agent being a not nice person, and they know in town that that's why they didn't get it. To show that is the reason they didn't get accepted as an applicant is impossible legally. The feeling is not evidence. You would have to be some sort of statement or document or something to help us do that. So there is pathways. We could file an application, and any application would fail because of lack of evidence. So we need that evidence of the unfavourable treatment is what the law says. You have to be treated unfavourably under the Equal Opportunity Act. You just use the state legislation. There is federal legislation too, but that is the thing that it's one of the things that I hate giving advice on it, because it's normally like, I believe you, I know that you probably felt that, but did they say anything? Do you have an email with any nasty words in it? Did somebody else hear it? And, most of the time that they haven't. So there is legal pathways. The evidence is the real problem there, which it's awful. Also, real estate agents aren't regulated really at all, especially rental ones. Now that is changing soon. There is process happening where there's going to be some sort of code of conduct, and maybe we can complain to somebody. But I can't complain to anyone really about real estate agents. Consumer affairs doesn't really work. There's no proper pathway, and it's a real shame. And I can't wait till I've got somebody to complain about. There is sections in the RTA as well. You can complain, but they're just not very helpful at the moment. We need a proper body that is keeping them in line, and then hopefully it'll happen one day.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Siobhan. I'm just reading the questions as they're coming through, and some interesting reflections as much as questions. I want to sort of one of the really interesting points you made, and it sort of goes to your previous point about whether a landlord is acting within the scope of the law or not. I think you mentioned in your talk that notices to vacate aren't automatically a trigger for renters to leave. When do those notices to vacate become legally enforceable?
Yeah, so on a notice to vacate, it says you must leave after 14 days. The wording is very harsh, and so renters think they have to leave. Now, the purpose of them is to say you're meant to leave, but if you don't leave, then the trigger for them to be enforceable is after the period that they expire, the landlord can apply to VCAT for a possession order. So VCAT have to make a possession order. That's an order that can then be enforced by the sheriff or the police. So then the landlord has the option to go and purchase a warrant from VCAT. That warrant then goes to the police station. There's police officers who just deal with these sort of things. And then a few days later, the person will get a knock on their door saying we're coming in 2 days. And then they will come and they will change the locks and physically remove the people from the house. So that's the worst outcome. It takes a while. We have great success in delaying and giving clients a bit more time. And sometimes we know we're going to lose, right? And I don't sugarcoat things for renters. That's a really important part of giving legal advice. But I can maybe push it a bit longer, to give them more time to find somewhere. But eventually, yes, that's what will happen. It's ordered by VCAT, purchase of a warrant goes to the cops come and will physically remove somebody. We sometimes call the police, try and get a few extra days. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. I think nobody really likes removing people from their home. It's an awful thing, and the police don't like it either. But that is the end result, and that's when I am out of legal options. Then if the blocks have been changed, I can still sometimes do a rehearing if an order's been made. I can do a rehearing application if the client didn't attend. Even up until the point the police have not executed the warrant, we can still do something legally. After the warrant is executed, it's near impossible to undo it.
Thank you. Thanks, Siobhan. I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking there might be just time to squeeze one more in, and I'm just trying to look at one that's sort of they're all relevant, but are both social housing and private renters eligible to access the RDRV? Probably a question for you, Siobhan.
Yes, all renters are eligible to access the RDRV. And so there's not really the Residential Tenancies Act generally applies to all renters exactly the same. There are some special provisions for the Director of Housing and soon to be social housing providers, but it's all the same.
And one finally for Auntie Jill, we're receiving some stuff come in about clearly the commentary you provided around homelessness has really resonated, and the question is, where can you find robust research which demonstrates the level of homelessness in the Aboriginal community, Auntie Jill?
Yeah, I'm not sure if any of the people in this workshop are aware of Nguala Willumbong. Nguala do a lot of work in the area statewide in homelessness, and they have leased a building in the city and so they have a lot of data, is what I'm trying to say. They collect the data, and the data's there, by the way, that shows the level of homelessness within the Victorian Aboriginal community. And Nguala does an amazing job to try and house as many as they can, right across the state of Victoria.
Thanks, Auntie Jill. Sorry, Siobhan.
I was just going to say, I think I left Nguala off my presentation, but they are also an APRAP provider, I believe, and maybe ATAR too. We work with them a lot because a lot of our clients are in Metro Melbourne, and they seem like they cover quite a large area. And they do fantastic work. So like I said on my presentation, it's not an exhaustive list. There is many other orgs.
Well, thank you both. It's 11 o'clock, so I'm going to wrap things up, but I do want to pay huge thanks to Auntie Jill Gallagher and Siobhan Doyle for your presentations today. For everyone on the call, this has been recorded and we will be providing it online shortly. There are a hell of a lot of people that couldn't be here today that wished they were. So lots of really important information for us all to distill and carry forward. I also want to thank my colleagues, in particular Amy Houston and Ella Longhurst, who were instrumental in providing support for this session. So with that, I wish everyone a great day, and we'll see you all soon.